How did the Black Panther become a global phenomenon? Well, it started with the right story and the right character. Today, Jesse J. Holland, author of Who is the Black Panther, put that story on page and brought it into the 21st century. And Aaron Walton is behind the placement of one of the most important characters in the story. Today, inside the billion-dollar blockbuster called The Black Panther. Right now.
If you want to do it right, you can do it right now. You can change your life. If you want to do it right, you can do it right now. Come on and change your life. Zakiya live in the building.
My king.
Stop it.
The Black Panther lives.
Hey there, it's Zakiya Larry. So listen, I am speaking to two historic figures and icons. Joining me today, we have Aaron Walton, and as a matter of fact, he's the co-founder of Walton Isaacson, the most interesting agency, and we'll learn more about that. And then we're also speaking to Jesse J. Holland. He's an award-winning journalist and the author of The Black Panther. Who is the Black Panther? I'm pretty sure you now know what we're about to talk about. So now you see I wasn't being over the top, right? So I wanted to just jump in, and if you'll give the audience a bit of context. I think as a typical consumer or people who may work in different segments of the industry, we don't understand how the flour and the egg becomes a cake. So will you tell us a little bit about how the two of you individually contributed to one of the most iconic pieces of film ever? We can start actually with you, Jesse.
Okay, so I've been a journalist for the Associated Press for 25 years. I've been coming to NABJ since 1989. I think I've only missed 3 so far. But in addition to being a journalist, I also write history books. So in 2016, my book, The Invisibles, The Untold Story of African American Slaves came out. And an editor at Lucasfilm read The Invisibles and she loved it. So she asked me, had I ever written fiction? And I told her, I love Star Wars. I didn't tell her I'd never written fiction before. So they offered me a chance to write a Star Wars tie-in novel called Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Finn's Story. So that came out at the end of 2016. And it got such great reception that I then get a call from Marvel Studios. And they say, well, we have this movie coming out called Black Panther in 2018. We want someone to take the history of the Black Panther and write it in a novel form to reintroduce the character to people before the movie came out.
Now, when you say reintroduce, give us a little bit of context, because the
Right.
Black Panther as a comic book character has existed for
decades.
decades.
Well, actually, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby actually introduced the character back in 1966. And that origin that they came up for T'Challa in 1966 stayed the exact same until 2005, when movie director Reginald Hudlin came in and updated it. Well, Marvel told me to take what was done in 1966, take what was done by Reginald Hudlin in 2005, combine them, and update them for 2018. Wow. So my novel was the first time there'd ever been the Black Panther novel written, ever. Out of all of the novels Marvel had ever done, they'd never done one about Black Panther until mine came out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have this novel.
Right.
You combined 2 different works, which, by the way, as a writer, that's difficult. You're taking 2 styles,
you're taking
products, and
3 completely different writers.
yeah.
And you have to honor the work that's been done before you. You don't want to pretend like Reginald Hudlin doesn't exist. You definitely can't pretend like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby don't exist. But
Absolutely.
the things that they wrote in the 1960s don't always quite translate to today. Because when they were writing Black Panther, the book was called Jungle Action. So that kind of stuff doesn't really translate to today. Right. So I had to take all of that great work, take the core of who they wanted T'Challa to be, and translate it as if he exists today in this modern world. And so it took a lot of work. I'm a comic book nerd, so I got to read a lot of comic books.
Such hard work.
Exactly. My wife hates the stacks in the basement. I said, I just need a few more.
I'm researching.
Exactly, it was a research. And so I got to take all of that work, the work that's been done by Christopher Priest, the work done by Don McGregor, the work that's being done by Ta-Nehisi Coates right now, and combine it all into one novel. to reintroduce this character for people who don't read comic books.
Wow, comic books to novel.
Right.
Aaron, enter Aaron. Okay, so we have this incredible journey, this story that has been molded into a new iteration, and now you get this gem.
We get this beautiful piece of art that Ryan and Nate, Ryan Coogler and Nate, the producer, have just crafted a piece of film, a story that not only appealed to Black consumers, but had just universal themes that appealed to a broad audience. We were lucky. My agency represents Lexus, one of the many agencies that represents Lexus, and we saw an opportunity with this particular film to put the car in the film in a way that felt organic, that helped tell the story of Lexus, that helped talk about technology, which is really what, Wakanda is all about, the most technologically advanced nation in the world. It told a story about strong Black women. It told a story about royalty, about so many of the things that really kind of touched the heart and soul of what we were trying to communicate to consumers when we were looking at Lexus. Obviously, luxury and prestige, and so there was a natural kind of fit between what it was that Wakanda and what Marvel was doing and what the Lexus story was all about.
The synergy.
The synergy was great.
Have you heard this before? Because the Lexus car that was used in the film has a very feline look to it. To me, I've always thought that. It looks very sort of feline, the front and the grille. I just thought it was perfect.
Well, the grille, everyone has really commented about this beautiful new grille, the spindle grille that they put on the front of the cars. I've never heard that part. What I have heard is how both the Black Panther and that LC seem to be formed into one beautiful kind of machine. And we actually, to introduce this car into the Marvel universe, we actually had some graphic novels developed. And the reason we did that was we wanted to have an organic way for the hardcore Marvel fans to be able to accept the fact that this car belonged in that universe. And the way we did it was we told the story of a Takumi master. Have you ever heard of Takumi masters? So Takumi master is basically one of the most celebrated engineers in the Lexus universe. And in order to become a Takumi master, this is the truth, it's not part of the story, but it is in the story, but the truth is you have to be able to create an origami bird with your less dominant hand blindfolded. And until you can master that craft, you can't become a Takumi master. So we thought that was a great way to talk about the craftsmanship and talk about the technology that's used in the cars, and that's kind of how we introduced the idea of Lexus being a part of that universe.
Innovative, and the thread here, obviously, the innovation of updating something that people have known, and then the innovation of merging together. Let me ask you this, because you mentioned introducing Lexus into an area that, maybe they're not ready for product placement, they're not quite sure. But let's talk about introduction in general. I know you have been asked, both of you, about the significance of this film to Black Americans, people of color globally. And I think, without shirking the question, I think we're pretty clear on why it resonated with brown folks. Have you thought at all about why it became a global phenomenon with people who look nothing like the characters? Why is that?
Well, I think it's just a great story.
Right.
Yeah.
It starts with a beautiful story, regardless of who was in it. It started on the page, and the fact that it was an all-Black cast and there was a Black director and a Black executive producer, I think gave the Black community a reason to feel proud, even beyond what they saw on the screen. And people wanted that piece of film to thrive in ways that I've never seen people get behind a feature film. And so there was this sense of pride, there was a sense of ownership, there was a sense of celebrating a part of our culture that we don't normally see. I truly believe that this film had such universal, appeal that it didn't surprise me that it wasn't just about black and brown people who celebrated what this was about. They were celebrating a great film. And for us, there were cues in there that spoke directly to the black community that said, you got us, you understand who we are, and you're positioning us in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. So I thought it was great.
And it also gave us a view of Africa that we very rarely see on the screen. A lot of people compare the Wakanda to Zamunda from the Eddie Murphy movie. So, but we don't get to see Africa like that on screen. Usually, when we see it, it's famine, it's war. We don't get to see what Africa could be.
And interestingly enough, we don't get to see what Africa is in many ways unless you've traveled, and it is an incredible continent. And just, different cities have different flavors. Johannesburg is incredibly metropolitan. It's the New York of the area, right? And I think that depiction matters.
Right. Well, when people ask me, how do I envision Wakanda? I tell them, for me, when I was writing Wakanda, I wrote Wakanda as Africa as it would have been without European colonization. Wow. That's what Wakanda is. Wow. That's how I see Wakanda in my head, as Africa if it had been left alone. And so you could get so many great stories just out of just that. Right. What would Africa be if it had been left alone? It had been left to grow on its own. And that's what I see. I think that's how we see Wakanda.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when it comes to the global, maniacal success of this project, could you ever expect it?
I don't know that here's what I know. Here's what I believe. I think people thought that this was going to be big. I don't think that anyone knew it would be historic like it is. I think we knew it was going to be big when you read the script, when you saw who was involved with it, this black, beautiful, royal cast that on their own have been tremendously successful as a company. It just raised the bar. I kind of sensed it was going to be a little bit more successful than most people thought when people started saying, yeah, this is my third time. And they were making plans to see it multiple times. And I thought, oh, this is going to go to a whole new level than what people had expected.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I sort of knew it was going to be really big when my parents, who are farmers and teachers in Mississippi, said they wanted to go see it. My parents had never seen a movie in a theater before.
Wow.
The Black Panther was the first movie they actually went to a movie theater to see. Wow. And one of the comparisons I think about with this is that think back to when Barack Obama first ran for president, people who had never voted once in their entire life showed up. Right. Same thing with Black Panther. People who don't go see movies showed up for that. Because you knew it was historic. Absolutely. You could feel that you had to be there. Right. And so that's when I started hearing from my parents that they wanted to go see it, I knew that this was going to be something extraordinary.
I took my mom to see it in 4D. I'm not sure she was going to talk to me after that. She wasn't ready. None of us were ready.
I want to hug her right now.
She hung in there. She held on to the seat and went with it. I was like, okay. It was kind of fun, but...
Aaron, I love that. Mom, great job. It's hilarious. As we round the bend here, we talk about the success, your journeys, and how you all came together. It's just so amazing. But let's peel back the layer really quickly on any fear. And I'd like to start with you, Aaron, because when you represent such large global brands, you have to be careful. I'm versed in crisis communications and I help brands to elevate. I understand that sometimes you have to toe the line and not alienate an audience. When you saw this content, knowing that it's a great story, but understanding that it might alienate a few people wondering, well, what about the purple panther? Or what about the polka dotted panther? You're picking up what I'm putting down? So my question is, was there any nervousness there, and even still, why move forward?
The truth is, I really did not have any nervousness in terms of placing Lexus in that environment. If you were to make that an all-white cast, would I have had any question about putting Lexus in that environment? And the reality is no. The reality is it was a beautiful story. It helped to tell the Lexus story in a way that, you know, talks about prosperity, talks about intellect, talks about excellence. This happened to be Black excellence. Why shouldn't we be a part of that? And so I never thought that it wouldn't, that it would be controversial in any way. What I was most concerned about is making sure that the things that made me nervous were, are we going to be able to get the cars there in time for the shoot? And much more of the logistical things that go behind the scenes. But Lexus was all in and was really proud of being a part of that historic moment. The truth be told, we've earned 5 billion earned media impressions. It's the most viewed content in the history of Lexus. So there's clearly been no backlash around that. And it gave Lexus and their dealers an opportunity to go into the community. Many of the tickets and the screenings that we had, they donated to schools, to kids that would not normally get a chance to go to see the movie. So there was a lot of great things that were coming out of this that far superseded any nervousness that we would have had about any controversy around it.
Amazing. Any nervousness for you? Because in a large part, it's still kind of your baby.
Right, exactly. For me, the biggest concern was that I know that there are people who take these characters very, very seriously. Okay. This is not just a comic book to some people. So you want to be sure when you're writing these type of popular characters that you get the voices right, you get the history right, you get the details right. I actually spent a month, frankly, studying West Africa, which is where Wakanda is located in the Marvel Universe. Because when you say Africa, people say, oh, it's in Africa. Africa's a huge place.
Africa is a continent.
It's a huge place.
Can we clear this up? Africa is a continent.
Right, exactly. So I went back and studied West African agriculture, because the trees the panthers are in, you want to make it's got to be authentic.
Absolutely.
You got in the clothing and the royalty and the history of West Africa. You want this to read correct to someone who's from there. And then it has to also read correct to the people who've been reading this character since 1966.
Wow.
So I really wanted to be sure that I got the flavor, I got the feel, I got the voices of these characters correct. And I think I ended up doing a pretty good job.
Great job.
I would say so. I think it kind of went well.
It went well.
It paid off a little bit.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And as we wrap up, do you have just a final closing thought for our audience when it comes to owning your own role in what could be historic? Because you never know. How do you own your own space when presented with a project?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that your reflexive answer to any opportunity should be yes, because you never know what it's going to lead to. I come out of a nonfiction writing tradition. No one expects a nonfiction history writer to write Star Wars. But when the opportunity was placed in front of me, I immediately said yes, and Star Wars led to Black Panther. You can't let opportunities pass you by, especially today, because you never know when it'll come again.
Wow. Wow.
That's great. I guess what I would say to journalists and to media companies in general would be, I think it's just as important to make sure that the narrative that you're talking about challenges stereotypes, and that you do as good of a job as you can showing the balance. Often we see a lot of Black stereotypes, men in prison, all of the negative things that we've come to see on television and in the print as well. But there's a whole nother side of the community that needs to be heard and needs to be talked about. And that's important for a number of reasons, because oftentimes entertainment companies pull story ideas from the headlines. And so what we want to do, and I think as a community, we have to make sure that some of those headlines reflect the entire beautiful kind of collective that we are. And so I hope more people would start to do more of that.
Absolutely amazing. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Incredible history makers. History makers. Oh my gosh, that gave me tingles. Aaron Walton, thank you so much for joining us, and of course, co-founder of Walton Isaacson. And then Jesse J. Holland, award-winning journalist, writer, and the author of Black Panther, Who is the Black Panther? Wow is an understatement. Thank you so much, Jesse J. Holland and Aaron Walton, for taking us behind the scenes of the Black Panther. Who knew that we'd be able to personally rub elbows with you history makers? That was so cool, right? And so speaking of history makers and your own path, it's now time for your 1 minute elevate. There are very few times when we embark upon something knowing that it will shape someone else's life or even make history. What I've learned throughout my journey and working with people, entrepreneurs from across the spectrum of beliefs and faiths and industries, they all have one thing in common. History makers put one foot in front of the other every day, not concerning themselves with shaping history, but making a difference where they are and doing their absolute best with what they've been given. See, I know your gift will make room for you. And so as we continue to push forward, understand that everything you leave behind you is your legacy and part of your own history. You're writing it right now. Congratulations in advance on being your very own history maker. Remember to like, share, and comment if anything today resonated with you, and join us again next week. Catch up on all episodes on ZakiyaLarryLive.tv, and let's keep elevating. It's Zakiya Larry Live. On the next Zakiya Larry Live, we're talking how to make fearless decisions with actor Brandon Michael Hall, star of the new CBS drama, God Friended Me. I mean, what would you do if you were presented with a script of this magnitude that includes the R word, religion, but also talks about trauma and connection and race relations and just the simple act of human being? Brandon is going to walk us through it all on the next Zakiya Larry Live. Make sure you tune in on ZakiyaLarryLive.tv and on Facebook.
Zakiya Larry.